Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bytesized Podcast. On this podcast, I talk to people making interesting and cool stuff on the internet. And usually along the way, I learn a lot about things that I don't know a lot about, that I would like to know more about. And this episode is a great example of that. I'm talking to Robert DeLuca, who works at Visa as a software developer, specifically focusing on accessibility. So making stuff that works for people who may be, for instance, blind or deaf or any other number of disabilities that makes it difficult for them to basically to use the internet that a lot of us are so used to. So it was a super interesting conversation, and a lot of the podcast towards the beginning was spent talking about Robert's background, how he got into software development. And it turns out that we actually have really similar backgrounds. It was kind of amusing to keep hearing things that reminded me a lot of my own experience getting started in development. So I think you'll like the conversation, and especially if you're a web developer, I think you'll find some things in it that are really interesting. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it. So without further ado, let's hear from Robert DeLuca. Robert, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, man, no problem. So I guess maybe to start, if you just want to say, I don't know, you can take this whichever way you want, but whether that's like what you want to be known for or like how you describe what you do to people, what's kind of your, like, who is Robert?
That's a great question. So I focus on accessibility currently in my current role. I like to think about that as a developer's job. So I want to, basically the impact that I want to leave on people is being able to build beautiful, awesome, highly interactive applications for everybody. And that includes anybody that has disabilities, whether it be colorblind, full blindness, deaf, cognitive, motor disabilities, anything. In regard, I would like for everybody to have equal access to those things. But I want to make sure that it doesn't compromise any design in the process, because I love beautiful design, great UX, great UI. And I think there's just kind of this weird thing in the web world where we think that in order to be accessible, you kind of have to be ugly too. So I guess that's kind of my mission statement right now, and the things that I'm marching towards. And it's kind of funny because accessibility kind of, strings through all of the things that I hold as core values, which are like testing and good code quality and writing great documentation and having great team process that allows developers to be more productive. And I think accessibility kind of strings through all of those things and improves a lot of things.
That's interesting. I had not thought of that other kind of component of it besides obviously like the actual application level stuff. So I actually, when I remember, I think we've just been like mutual Twitter followers, I guess, for a while. And I saw when you moved, I think you're at Visa now currently. Is that correct?
Correct.
Cool. Yeah. So I saw that you made that move, and I think I remember you calling out specifically that it was to do like accessibility stuff. And I thought that was super interesting because I don't know anything about that whole world, even though I have, a web development background. I've worked at a couple companies doing like Ember stuff and React stuff and Rails, all that kind of thing. I don't really know anything about accessibility. So I imagine we'll talk about that more as we go, into that. But I do want to say, you kind of called it out. I actually am colorblind, and that's like not a huge impact on my day to day, like using the internet.
Right.
But it is like sometimes noticeable. At my current gig, we have like this weekly email thing that goes out where they say like, here's what we've been up to, like here are blockers and things like that, like from kind of a product team perspective. And the only time that's ever been relevant is they were using just like these red-green. I guess I'm red-green colorblind. They're using these kind of indications of like whether progress is happening or not happening. And I was like, oh, I don't know which one is which there. So yeah, I had them switch to like icons, like colored icons, instead of just like colors. So that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it seems like that's not I mean, it is a deal of some kind, but it's not a huge deal comparatively to some of the other kind of more complex things.
Right, but that did impact the way you were able to perceive like how things were progressing through, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, one of my best friends is colorblind too, and to go back, like you saying that you don't know much about it, web accessibility, and that's totally okay. It's like I think I think about it as a progression of through adding to your skills and just adding things to your toolbox. And like I think about accessibility the same way I think about testing. And honestly, I tell this to people I work with too. It's hard to care about accessibility unless you are like close to people that need it, right? And you don't value it until you experience that kind of thing, and it's a lot of empathy building. So like I care about it deeply because my mom's 100% blind.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I grew up like watching her go through those struggles and do those things. And I recognize if I didn't have that experience, then I probably wouldn't even be introduced to it. I wouldn't even care about it. So like I recognize it as a challenge that I have. And in educating people and trying to get people to do it. So it's just one of those things. And it's okay. It's just, it's one of those things you have to end up working towards and getting people to care about. And I think, and that's why like I kind of like led off with this. I think about it as a developer problem rather than, I hear a lot of people that do accessibility things. They kind of take this like moral high ground stance.
Interesting.
And
yeah, okay.
That's the wrong way to go about it, especially if you want people to care about it and do it. Because
sure.
right
yeah,
when
I can
you
imagine.
make that, right when you make that argument, like it goes right into like a fight or flight response. And it's like they start to like rest back and try to justify the reasons they didn't do it, rather than coerce them into like opening their mind and getting them to do it. You want to like you want to be on their side. Like you can't like beat them over the head with and like, why aren't you doing this? You have to sit down with them and help them understand it.
That's because I imagine I mean for me, unless someone called it out explicitly as like a requirement in like a in a feature ticket or something like that, it's rare that I've ever really considered it. Which is totally like you said, it's like a function of empathy, which is really interesting. So I do want to like get into more of like the specifics of how that works, but maybe to begin with, can you tell me a little bit about like your background and like how you got into web development? I know you had this kind of a personal element to the accessibility thing. I'm just curious, like in general, what kind of that process has looked like.
My path is interesting, and actually everybody's probably is. Right, but so I didn't go to college. I came right out of high school. So like what actually started it was like always kind of a tech nut. And if my mom is listening, I don't know if I was reflecting on this in my shower in the morning this morning, and I don't know if she realizes how much of an impact. In 7th grade, we made a little deal. If I got really good grades in the first semester, I think it was, she would buy me a Windows laptop.
Nice.
And it was just like we went to Walmart and like got like a little HP laptop. I don't remember the specs. It was running Windows XP at the time. And to age myself, or to lack of age myself, I guess this was back in 2007.
Mm-hmm. Do you mind if I ask how old you
are? No, I'm 23.
Okay, so I'm 24, so we're similar ages. I do want to talk about that because I imagine there's some interesting things there. But carry on for now.
No problem. Yeah. So like this was in 2007, and I was thinking about this, and it kind of made a profound impact on my life. Right. So like I got this Windows laptop. I was really into these hobby grade RC cars. I used to like build them, race them, and do all kinds of like fun stuff. And where the web comes in at this point is I used to like be on forums all the time, helping people, asking questions. And I got the idea of, I think I can build a better website than what I'm on. So I started Googling around, and like I was fumbling around with vBulletin and trying to like set up a server
like
and
vBulletin and like PHP. Right? That was the other one. Yeah, I remember this.
Going through all kinds of that stuff, and like kind of got me into the tech world. I had a shop teacher. I was like a catch-all in middle school where we did everything. And he was a former like Apple Genius Bar employee, and he was a teacher now. And he like basically, I got at some point, I forget how it happened, but I got sick of Windows, and I like installed a Linux distro that I found on that laptop, and he helped me through that. But he like actually handed me a Hackintosh CD to run like Tiger.
Yeah.
Mac OS X Tiger on my Windows laptop. I don't know if I ever got that running right because, driver support and all that stuff.
I used to have a Hackintosh. They're tricky. Yeah. That's so funny. Yeah. I remember that time very well.
It was fun. I think I installed it and I couldn't get sound drivers working or anything, and it was kind of a no-go for me. Mm-hmm. So interestingly enough, I took the Linux route. I don't remember the distro. It was like some random distro I found. Yeah. As you do with Linux.
Yeah.
But that kind of like started off my path, and from there, like I really wanted, I was really opposed to anything Apple and Mac OS and all that stuff. Just being a strong-headed teenager, I guess, that was a fanboy. And then that teacher kind of shifted my thinking more towards Macs. And then my brother at the same time was getting into photography and just got a Mac from my cousin that they bought and had Photoshop on it, and I like played around with that, and that was fun. And I was like, oh, I need a Mac. Mm-hmm. And then like basically from there I got into like the Mac versus PC debate on YouTube, and then and from there when Apple, like I was a huge Apple fanboy at that point, like I transitioned from Windows to Apple fanboy.
The hypnosis had worked, the Steve Jobs hypnosis. I know
the reality distortion field. Man, I was such a big Apple fanboy. I did it in my freshman year of high school for AP Human Geography. We had a history fair that we had to enter into or something like that, and I did a whole documentary. It was like a 30-minute documentary on Steve Jobs.
Oh man, 30 minutes is a long time.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
I wonder if I can dig that up. It's on a hard drive somewhere.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I was much the same way especially when I was in high school. I got one of my first Macs, and I was just like insufferable about it, honestly. So
I was right there with you.
You got a Mac, and then did you just kind of accidentally fall into web development specifically, or how did that happen?
So I was a huge fanboy, and I think so. Like it's been a weird path for me, right? So like I started another website called Apple Rumors. It was like apple-rumors.net, and for a summer there, I like styled this WordPress site with a theme. Like I didn't actually write any code. I did my best, like fumbled through all of that. Wrote a bunch of, like I ran my own rumors blog. I found this because I really wanted, basically what I wanted at that time was I wanted a native iOS app for my rumor site, because Mac Rumors at the time didn't. I still don't think they have one. It's fine because the web is a great medium for this. Nobody really wants a native app to look at, Apple Rumors. Yeah. But back then, that's what I really wanted.
Right.
And I think it's called App Maker. So I launched an app in the App Store. Like I, tried to figure all that out. But before that, when the iOS SDK was released, I tried to be an iOS developer. I picked up I forget what it was called, like Objective-C programming, or learning how to program at Objective-C by Steve Cohen, I think. I learned the syntax, learned what arrays were, learned, all those things and the types. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm a programmer now. And I actually didn't realize that you have to like learn Cocoa, the framework.
Yeah. They're almost like two kind of separate things.
Right.
I remember that.
Like, I didn't realize back then how close I was to like figuring it out. And I just had to sit down with somebody that knew it. But I ended up like not able to do that. I put a couple tutorial apps into the App Store and stuff, and did all the certificate signing and all that fun stuff. But I never really got there. I never could sit down and actually write an app myself. So then I kind of got a little discouraged from there. I got into a digital design class in high school. Thought I was going to be a designer. And then didn't like that because it was a little too subjective, I thought, which is hilarious in retrospect, because development is also very
it totally is
subjective.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
But at the time, I thought I was picking this more scientific process. Right? It's not actually that at all. But from there, I kind of went into design and then went back to web because I learned CSS and HTML right at the time that CSS3 and HTML5 were real hot. I have this screenshot that's on my desktop that I've just kind of kept there as a reminder of my first website that I kind of built through NetTuts Plus.
Oh, okay.
Like,
yeah.
It's hilarious because it has like inset borders everywhere, off like weird border radiuses everywhere, gradients, and like
I remember
everywhere
that
I could
era
put those
of design.
Yeah, it was great.
Lots of gradients and like rounded rectangles and stuff like that.
Yep, I had a radial gradient, I had a linear gradient. I was like, this is awesome. And that's kind of like the start of it there. And from after high school, I did want to tell a cool story because I always forget about this. Since I was in, this will be kind of funny to you since you were also like an insufferable fanboy, right?
Yep.
That was me and high school, and I was mad that in my digital design class we had to use Windows computers for all these things. They weren't bad. I was just being insufferable, right? So I sent an email to Steve Jobs saying like, why can't we use, like, I want a Mac at this school, blah, blah, blah. It's like, can you somehow help me and influence the district to get this?
So good. Yeah, I love it. Okay, what happened?
And he forwarded it to the head of education, John Couch, I believe.
Oh, man, that's awesome.
And they sent an iMac to my school on my behalf.
Oh, that is awesome.
It was really awesome. I always forget to tell the story because
that's super cool. Wow. Yeah. That's one time. So I want to say one thing, which is that if we had known each other in high school, we would have been best friends. We have super similar stories. And as you kept saying things, I'm like, wow, that's just like when this happened to me. So my laptop broke one time, my MacBook Pro I had like a really like super generous great aunt who like bought me a MacBook Pro, which was ridiculous.
That's awesome.
And it like it like totally set, I mean, in the same way that you were kind of talking about, it like completely set the stage for what I would do, right? For like for the rest of my life up till this point, at least. So anyway, it broke, unfortunately, and I tried to take it to the Apple store and get it repaired. And this was like when I would say the Apple support is still really good, but it was
phenomenal.
It was like phenomenal back then. And so they like tried to fix it, and I can't remember what exactly the details were, but like it just wasn't what I wanted, like the level of service or whatever. So I also emailed Steve Jobs.
I love it.
And I was like, I don't even remember what the email was, but it's basically like, this is like the service has been kind of crappy, and like I really like, I'm such a huge fan of Apple. Like I hope that like this could go a little bit better. And I'm pretty sure that it did help, because next time I went, they went and like fixed it, like no questions asked, didn't owe them any money or anything like that. But that might just be, I mean, who knows? Because I don't think I ever got an actual reply. But that is funny. I guess maybe people still do that now, maybe, but back then, for whatever reason, there was kind of like this like lore that you could email Steve and something would happen. Yeah,
and I think I saw like other people doing it on Mac Rumors or something, and I was like, I'm gonna do this. I'm frustrated.
The other thing that you said that was really funny to me is I, in high school, also wrote for a Apple Rumors website, which is so weirdly specific.
Oh my God.
Isn't that crazy? So I had completely forgotten about that until you just said that. I was like also trying to like kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And for a while I thought it was going to be like writing.
Same.
And like I really liked Apple stuff. So I found like it was like kind of this weird, sketchy blog network that just happened to have like a Apple website. I wish I could remember what it was called. It was something similar to like Apple Rumors, but that's not what it was called. It was something kind of in that same vein. And so I would write, and I think they tried to pay me like $1 an article or something like that. And at the time I was like, whoa, I was like, sweet.
I'm getting paid.
$1? Hell yeah. So, and then eventually it was just like the amount of work was just totally not worth it, obviously. And it wasn't like it was a site where I was, not that I would be doing it, I guess, for the recognition, but it just definitely didn't feel like it was going anywhere.
Yeah.
That's just such a funny, I'd completely forgotten about that until you said that.
That's kind of funny because Apple Rumors originally started out because I wanted, and this is everything in hindsight is hilarious, but like I wanted to write for Mac Rumors. I couldn't write for Mac Rumors. Probably for good reason, right? Because I was like a freshman in high school or whatever. But the Apple Rumors started off as like an open platform for anybody to write Apple news or whatever if they wanted to. And then it kind of like it was based off of vBulletin for a little while, never took off. And then when I switched over to WordPress and then built that native app or had that service build the native app, I put ads on it. And I had to actually, over that summer, I made like $200 from ad revenue.
Nice. Wow.
And I was like number 2 or 3 on Google search results if you Googled Apple Rumors.
Oh, that's awesome.
But, when school started, all the news ended up breaking at like 9, 10 a.m.
Yeah.
While I'm in school. Yeah. And if you don't get the scoop in the first 5 minutes, you're out.
For sure. Yeah, that's funny.
It kind of died off, but that's hilarious. We have like strikingly similar paths.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing for me that was immediately like, so for me, I did go to school for like almost a year, and then I like to study computer science, and then I actually just stopped going, and I got kicked out because I just just straight up didn't go. I was really kind of bummed out at like how theoretical the computer science stuff was. And I genuinely think that it is because I came from this background of like being really into Apple stuff in particular, where there is like this culture. And I think it's something that is totally in the tech community now because of Apple, this like culture of like shipping and stuff like that. And like building stuff. And so I was like, why haven't we built anything?
Yeah.
And so
like, why am I talking about how a compiler works?
Yeah. And like all this stuff that like I felt like I would probably discover and have a better sense of like why I needed it when I was in the midst of building something. So my like I started doing Ruby stuff. Like I would literally skip class to go do Ruby, like to learn Ruby, which is like kind of awesome. in like hindsight, it's just like why, like you could do both. But obviously, it worked out fine. But my experience of like I knew a lot of people. Like I had a Twitter account really early on, and so I had been like following lots of like people who are making stuff, like a lot of designers and stuff like that. And I was like, I want to be doing that, not this like theoretical stuff. So that's funny. I'm kind of hesitant sometimes to like talk about like how big of an influence like Apple stuff had on me in the early days, because I'm like not as much of a fanboy as I used to be. In fact, like a lot of the time I'm pretty annoyed with the Apple stuff, which is
like the touch bar.
Like it's kind of I've become very like curmudgeonly. I imagine if we have similar backgrounds, you're probably in a similar place to where I am.
Yeah. Or just like, this
what is like, happening?
I hate saying it, but it's like, man, this wouldn't have happened if Steve was there.
Yeah. Like basically like all the, whenever there's like an OS update, and I miss those like OS updates. Maybe they still do this, but it just doesn't feel like they're as stable as they used to be. But they used to have those like in between years for a couple of the OS updates where they were like basically purely bug fixes and like performance stuff. And I'm like,
I keep on saying we need a snow leopard.
Yeah. Those kind of like, I miss those. I want more of those. I don't need like the touch bar. I actually still have the pre-touch bar MacBook Pro because I'm scared to like, I don't want the new keyboard. I don't want the touch bar.
I'm gonna hold out.
Yeah. So
at this point, it's like, are the kids wrong?
Yeah, exactly.
Am I wrong or are the kids wrong?
Exactly. Yeah. And maybe it's because like, I know for me, like I actually do work now on my laptop instead of just kind of using it as like a vehicle to like learn more about like exploration and stuff like that. So I'm like, I just want something that works. Like I'm scared if I upgrade, I'm gonna like Homebrew's gonna stop working, like stuff like that.
Exactly. I've gone through a couple like somewhere along the lines in my career path. I ended up at a startup that was all Ruby on Rails, and like we've gone through a couple of those like OS upgrades where it breaks a lot of stuff on Ruby, and you're just like trying to figure out paths. And
Ruby is particularly
open
finicky.
SSL. Yeah.
So when you did, so again, like I this is funny because I've we've been following each other, I think, for a while. And in particular, I think I've noticed in the past, I got the sense that, like I said, you and I have similar backgrounds, it seems like. So what was so you didn't get like a degree or anything like that. Like, what was your kind of, like, if you could take me like the tour through your first couple years as a web developer, because I find that that's kind of the tricky part for a lot of people, is like kind of getting your foot in the door. How did that work out for you?
So I tell the people this all the time. I would never be able to replicate this. It was a lot of awesome opportunity at the perfect time. And it's just like, it happened so awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's the same for me. So I'm curious what your story is.
It was like seizing the opportunity and having the opportunity even present itself. So in high school, my senior year, like my junior year, I realized that I'm not going to college. I wanted to go somewhere, but I was like, wow, I really want, because my dad is pretty successful, never went to college. Mm-hmm. And I figured like I could always go back if I wanted to,
sure.
But I always thought about it as like putting a mortgage on your life, except you can't, go bankrupt, and it's there until you die.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wasn't quite interested in like having hundreds or, like $100,000 in student loans. Right. So I wanted to try it on my own. Mm-hmm. So my senior year of high school, I had a teacher that was awesome and suggested that I do an internship, because at the time I worked at Sonic and I was miserable.
And you're sorry, just to give context. So you're based in Austin, right? Is that all of this taking place are you in Austin?
No,
is that correct?
I am in Austin, okay. But all of this was taking place in a small-ish town in Southwest Florida, Fort Myers, Cape Coral area.
Okay, cool.
So it's not a tech hub whatsoever.
Right. Sure.
So it was interesting. So I was just like sending emails to all of the places that did like web development, and these are all just like mom and pop shops doing WordPress sites and whatnot. And like one of them was like, they replied and they're like, "We love your ambition. We can't hire you." And then one of my teachers had a great idea of me doing an internship.
Right.
So I was the first person at this school, at least, maybe in Lee County, I don't know, to take an internship. So a lot of people would do OJT, which is on-the-job training. Okay. And they just give you that, like the last period or last 2 periods of your day from school. And you would go off and you would go to work, basically, and you would get credits for working.
Yeah.
So instead of doing that, I did an internship with a agency called 312 Creative. And after that internship, at the same time, there's this thing that just got started, which is called Digital Lee. And it was like a county-wide digital competition, basically. They had different kinds of things you can enter in, like identity package design and web design and like cool. 3D modeling. And you could win all these things in categories. So I got like second place in identity design for my own identity. And I got paired up with this awesome designer. Name was Katrina. And she designed a school website, and I like kind of cut it together and made it a real thing, and ended up winning Best of Show for that. And
nice.
Best of Show was like, you get like a Wacom tablet, Adobe CS 5.5 at the time, I think.
Yeah.
And a new MacBook Pro.
Oh, hell yeah. Nice. That's awesome. That's the grand prize right there.
Yeah. So I was able to, from there, like 312 Creative was like, "You are awesome. We're going to hire you." So I got a job right out of high school.
Wow. Awesome.
Because of that, basically. Mm-hmm. So like, if it wasn't for her putting together this really awesome design for me to actually code up, this probably would have never happened.
Right.
But at the same time, like it was up to me to like send those emails and like
sure.
have the ambition, but she really set the stage for me there. And I always appreciate that.
Yeah.
And so like from there, and this is also another thing that I don't think could ever be recreated. Just from working at 312, I put together, I think 5 to 9 different WordPress sites from scratch that were like really nice designs. I picked 312, or I really wanted to work with them because they were awesome people, and they most definitely had the most modern design and development anywhere in Fort Myers. Yeah. So like I got to put together these really nice WordPress sites that did really cool things, and like 9 of them really fast in a year. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, they weren't able to continue paying me, like the cash flow problem.
Right.
And I was laid off. But Twitter, then, like, I was going to Front End Conf in St. Petersburg, ran by Dan Denny. And through there, I was able, he sent out a feeler for me on Twitter. I got hooked up with this company called IZEA and drove up there and it was in Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
So it was about 300 miles north.
Oh, wow.
So I drove up there, had an interview.
It's a nerve-wracking drive.
Yeah, a lot of time to think.
Yeah, exactly.
So I drove up there, had an interview. They were a rail shop. They took a chance on me. And I was surrounded by a bunch of really smart people that were doing Rails and loved like code quality and things like that. And testing, they were huge on testing and, convention over configuration, all in on the Rails philosophy. Mm-hmm. And I got to learn Ruby and I did a lot of the front end work, made a lot of mistakes there.
Yeah.
Learned from those mistakes and then ended up towards the end of the time there, I wanted to do more JavaScript front end things and ended up going to the front side, which Charles and Brandon, if anybody's familiar with them in the Ember community.
Yeah, totally.
I learned a ton from them on like software practices, managing clients, managing expectations, always communicating, writing great documentation, always writing tests, like what it takes to be a good software developer. Yeah. So I always say like I went to the Charles and Brandon School of Coding.
Yeah.
And I just like grew exponentially through those experiences. And it was great. And then from there, I kind of ended up getting recruited to Visa through. So my friend and I, somewhere along the lines there, I took over an open source project called Dropkick. Mm-hmm. Somebody wrote it, and we were using it at IZEA. And the maintainer was like, "I don't want this anymore. If anybody wants it, take it." And I was like, "Yes, me." Right. At the time, it had like 900 stars on GitHub, and I was like, "This is awesome."
Yeah.
So we took it over, and then my friend and I rewrote it to 2.0 as a base JavaScript library, no jQuery dependency.
Nice.
And grew it to like 2,000.
And what is it? Sorry, what is the project exactly? Like, what does it do?
Dropkick. Sorry, yeah, it's a select replacement library.
Okay, yeah, everyone's got a use for one of those, totally. So that's worthwhile.
So it recreated a select out of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Nice.
So my spin on that was like I wanted to make it accessible, and I wanted it to be like no dependency on Java or on jQuery.
Right.
So we went in there and like rewrote it and launched 2.0, and then got it up to like 2,000 GitHub stars,
wow.
Which at the time I was like, "Oh, this is awesome!" And then it's not, stars aren't much of a merit,
Yeah, that's interesting. The GitHub star like ecosystem is interesting, but I mean I imagine that there's probably some great lessons to be learned in like maintaining even a moderately. So I mean, I would say that's a very successful open source project. But like anything that has a moderate amount of traffic, I think is really interesting opportunity.
I learned a lot.
Yeah, like you mentioned, like empathy. That's another interesting scenario in which you're dealing with people all over the place doing all kinds of projects, all needing to use the same kind of tool.
Many different use cases.
I've always admired that about things like Ember and React, where like the amount, it's just like dizzying, the amount of people and the amount of applications that are using all that stuff, and to keep all of that to stay consistently like meeting, I guess, the needs of the community is just like, that's really incredible that people can do
hard
that.
And it's kudos to them. It's huge. Like Dropkick isn't even like, it's not high traffic really.
Right.
It has a good amount of stars. A lot of them came from like an email blast from like JS Weekly.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's a good amount of users and supporting them, but like nothing like on that scale.
Right.
Like triaging issues and whatnot. It's nothing like massive kudos to them, because I have a small taste, and sometimes I'm just like, I get a new issue, I'm like, oh, I don't want to, but you can sit down and eventually do it. But
I like
it's just one of those things.
Recently, like when I guess let me rewind a little bit and say that once again we have very similar stories once again.
That's awesome.
I went and interned at a company that was like a client agency, kind of like yours. We met over Twitter.
Nice. Twitter is the place. That's where I found like, it is. Real quick, like at EmberConf, that's how I ended up at the front side, was because like I sat next to Brandon,
Mm-hmm.
and Brandon was like, "Hey, I know you from Twitter," and I was like, "I know you from Twitter."
Yeah.
And it was like the rest is history.
Yeah, it's for better or for worse, it is like the networking thing is totally a thing, and we can talk about that here in a sec because I do want to maybe try and see if we can dig some recommendation or like morsels out of both of our stories for people,
Absolutely.
as best we can. Maybe that's not possible, but anyway, I met the guy who ran this agency. It was a team of 4 people, so super small. There's like basically like what was it? It was like 2 designers. So my boss was kind of designer and developer, and then like a copywriter, and then there was me. So like I was their first hire, like as an intern, and I came to do Ruby on Rails stuff, and then I realized when I got there, I was like, oh, I don't actually really know Ruby on Rails that well. Like I had some like example projects up on GitHub and stuff like that. But it was, again, very similar to what you were saying. Like I basically was just asking questions constantly and really learned a lot. But I realized going in like there, I didn't really know anything. And so it was just like it was an incredible opportunity and totally set the stage for, not only like the rest of my, I guess, career so far, but also like knowing what kind of place I wanted to work at. Which is really cool. It's I've been lucky, and it sounds like you had a pretty similar circumstances where like I honestly haven't had an awful job yet. It's been like a lot of really cool people I worked with so far. Which has been awesome. I do want to see. I know you said like there was a lot of kind of opportunities that presented itself, and I feel much the same way. But I'm curious. I guess maybe for some context, I tweeted this thing out recently that was like I'm a self-taught developer. So I said like if you're a self-taught developer, you're trying to get into the industry, like reach out. I would love to give you advice and love to like kind of connect you to people if I can. And that was, I got way more people contacting me than I thought, which was awesome. Like it didn't bother me at all, but I started to see, the same kind of things, the same kind of problems. And the reason that I called out earlier that like that first step, getting your foot in the door, is I think that's where everyone has problems, right?
Mm-hmm. Like breaking the ice.
Yeah, exactly. So like, it's not a matter of like, there's some people that are going to struggle with like maybe the routine of like learning to code and like putting in the time to do that. But I think for a lot of people, it's more the, I want to say like the social aspect of it, or like knowing the right things to do to even just get your foot in the door. So I'm curious if you have like, say hypothetically, and maybe actually this happens to you in real life, like it has happened to me in the past, where people say like, how, like I want to start programming, like how do you give them advice in that way, or what kind of things would you tell them?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think one of the biggest things I learned, and obviously coding is a big piece of it,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the biggest things I learned is it's more about who you know rather than what you know.
Right.
And if you can surround yourself with the people that know a good amount, then you're in a good place. And I was always, so basically, I'm trying to think like, so at the end of my stint at IZEA, I wanted to go somewhere else. And I wasn't quite there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I couldn't, I wasn't much more than just like a CSS developer at the time. I took on some Ruby projects or features, and wrote some Ruby and stuff. And it was okay, but it was like very junior stuff. So I set on a path of like networking as much as I possibly could,
Mm-hmm.
going to meetups, talking at meetups about different things, meeting new people, writing blog posts, basically kind of like self-marketing myself in a way. I did a lot of open source work, and I knew where I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to work in Ember. So I did a lot of open source stuff in the Ember community.
Nice.
I built my blog in Ember. I wrote some add-ons. I contributed to a lot of open source projects in the Ember ecosystem. And that's ultimately how I ended up at the front side, is because they knew of me in the community, which was really cool.
Right.
So like, if I have any advice there is to get yourself out there, like get in, put your name in front of people,
Mm-hmm.
work with people. That was the biggest thing. Like I paired with Ember Sherpa over some things, and like pairing with people. And if you're a more senior developer, I would say take the opportunity to pair with juniors.
Yeah, for sure.
And people that are coming new to the industry, because you can help make those connections. You can help those people move along and progress and learn.
It's a really great, like, pairing is totally underrated. I would even say as a senior, like when you're in the senior developer world, and pairing again with junior people is a really great way to keep to remind you of like what stuff was tricky in the early days.
Keep you rooted.
Yeah, that's like the Buddhist thing I always think of as like the idea of beginner's mind, where like after a very long time of being a developer, you kind of forget like what it was like to have that beginner's mind. It's really important to keep that. I think about that often, and I try to pair as much as I can, especially with junior developers, because there's things where I'm just, especially like take Rails, for instance, where like there's so much kind of like magic kind of thing going on, where there's things you don't think about anymore, where it's just like, oh, that's just the way it is. But
like active model is actually doing a bunch of SQL queries under the hood.
So it's like good to have someone be like, well, but like, why is it that way? And then having to stop and be like, oh, that's a good question. So
slowly unfurling those abstractions that you're standing on top of.
Exactly. Yeah. One thing you said, you had this idea of like self-marketing. One thing I told someone recently, very related to that, is they were, trying to get in the industry and trying to get a job. And I had read recently, I have a side project I've been working on, and it's one of those like very classic developer side projects where you spend a really long time writing code, and then you're like, oh, okay, I built this thing. Like, now how do I market it? And one thing I read that really stuck with me was like developers usually spend, I mean, like it depends on the person, but I mean, honestly, like 90% of the time doing development and like 10% doing marketing, or like maybe even less. Mm-hmm. And you should strive for something more like 50-50. And I thought that was interesting because I totally felt like it applied to like career stuff as well, right? Like you can spend a lot of time learning to code and do all that stuff, but if you're not also going out to like meetups, or like even just, you don't have to leave the house, you can just start a blog, you can, like you said, do open source stuff and things like that. Like I genuinely feel like you should strive to do like 50-50 of that, because you could be like me and like do an internship or something like that and realize that you like, even I could have done another like year of like learning Rails on my own, but it's when I actually got in the door and like had someone to ask questions to, that's where the actual like learning happened, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
But it might be different for each person, but I think that is at least consistently something that people don't do as much as they should.
So you remember earlier when I said I thought it was hilarious that I picked programming because it was supposed to be like more scientific, right, and less subjective. Yeah. Well, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's actually the opposite. It's all about people. It's all about community, and helping others along, and that'll actually help you in your career and progress you. And honestly, like, and it's not about what you know. To an extent, it is, but more about who you know. And one of the better examples I have is one of my best friends. He's by far a better developer than I am, much smarter than I am. And like just the way his mind works and pulls apart problems and solves these things and does really complicated things and fixes them. And like, I'm not on that level, but I was able to get jobs faster and get in the door and provide value in different ways, because I was networking and he wasn't. Right. So that provided the opportunity there. Yeah. So it was an interesting thing for me to reflect on and figure out. And I feel like it was one of those things that I kind of thought about like a year and a half ago. And because he was really trying, he basically was trying the same thing, trying to break into the industry. He was also from Fort Myers, Florida, and trying to get jobs somewhere else and somebody to take a chance on you and move you out there or anything like that was really hard, especially if you don't have that portfolio backing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So like he would always get these like weird, crazy coding problem challenges and interviews and stuff.
Like
those kind of things.
Stuff.
Yeah. And I think one of the things he told me over the weekend that he had an interview question was like, solving the angles of the clock hands on a clock at any given time or something like that. And it's like, why is that an interview question?
Yeah, I think I've seen either that problem or a variation of it before. I mean, yeah, why is it an interview question? This is like when I wanted to go like work at Google or something. So I was trying to study those kind of questions. And I was like, this sucks. Like, this really sucks.
Like, I've worked my entire career. He's the type of person that could solve that and knock it out of the park.
Right.
I am not. I would have flat out failed that, and I would have not gotten that job. Here. So like my entire like career and what I've been doing is like the human aspect is to get them to know me as the human and what value I can provide. And I'm not saying that I'm a bad programmer, right? I'm just saying that like there's other value to be provided on teams that isn't just programming. And I think a lot of programmers don't think about that. There's a lot of business value that's needed on dev teams. And so like that's kind of been my thing. Like I try to basically any interview I try to stay away from those kind of things. Like if somebody wants me to whiteboard, I'll refuse, because it's like, when have I ever whiteboarded in my day-to-day job?
Yeah. I think I've whiteboarded, but not in like a code way, in like a systems architect, like this is how the system would work out kind of way. Yeah. Anytime I get to interview people, I just ask them a question and see how they would think through it. And I always bring my computer. If they need to Google it or work it out that way, they can do that. All I'm looking for is how they tick, not necessarily like, hey, can you solve this really tricky problem? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not a great. It definitely selects for a certain kind of like studying process, and like I guess also like a certain kind of person, which is not necessarily bad, but I think more the studying process, like it almost kind of encourages that like high school, college, like cramming kind of style. I've felt that I really recently in the last like year or so, I almost kind of reconsidered like trying to go get a job at like Google or something like that, and I started doing the studying, and I was like, this is not me, it's not interesting to me, and it's not like a good usage of my time or my energy.
I'm right there with you.
So I want to shift gears, and so you talked about like bringing value. So I think this is kind of like the impetus for me reaching out, because I was really interested in this idea of like doing accessibility work, which is one of the big things of like value that you're providing, right? I think it sounds like you kind of got recruited to your recent gig or your current gig because of that stuff. So can you kind of, and like really, truly, I don't really know anything about like accessibility stuff. Like I'm very much a novice. So I'm curious, like how would you, so like in the same kind of question of like, how would someone get into like web development? Like how would you recommend someone take their first couple of steps into doing like accessibility work? What does that look like exactly?
So I think there's two things that really help me understand accessibility. And it's not like I'm like this whiz at accessibility, because I'm not really, honestly. It's just the fact that like I've been persistent about it. And so the two things that kind of unlocked it for me, and it's one, understanding how a screen reader works. If you are serious about wanting to do web accessibility, it would behoove you to sit down and learn how a screen reader works. Turn your screen off, turn the screen reader on. Everybody that has a Mac has VoiceOver, which is the built-in screen reader.
Yeah.
You can hit Command F5 to turn it on and Command F5 to turn it off.
Cool.
And to navigate around, you would use you tab to interactive elements. That's a key thing there. Interactive elements.
Tab. Instead of like moving between elements like it does normally, or
right. So that'll just get interactive elements like selects, inputs, buttons, things that you can have an action on.
Okay. Yeah.
Links, something that'll do something.
Right.
And then you use the VoiceOver keys, and this is specific to VoiceOver, but all screen readers kind of operate this way. They just have different key bindings to move around.
Yeah.
You'd use the VoiceOver keys, which are Control and Option, and the arrow keys, up, down, left, or right, to navigate and transverse through the screen. And you can think about this like the screen reader, like, and this is why I kind of think about accessibility as a programming thing, is because what the screen reader reading is a tree. It's just a is an object
Right.
tree of
Yeah.
the view of the what's on the screen, the GUI.
Right.
And if you use those arrows, it'll go through everything on the screen. And so like
Including-
paragraphs.
So
and-
like the Mac thing that includes like the menu bar up at the top, or is it
Yep.
kind of on the focused application, or how does that?
on the yeah. So focus management is a big thing there too. We can get that in a second.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, so like wherever the focus is, so like if you enable it, like right now, if I were to enable it in the Chrome browser, Chrome is what has focus right now, so it'll go into the web page
Yeah.
that I'm currently on. Especially if this application has any kind of focus management where it's like telling the browser to where to set focus.
Mhm.
So then you can navigate around, and this is like a common mistake I see is usually people like not understand. The reason I say like understanding a screen reader is fundamental is one, that's what a lot of the users are going to be using.
Right.
Two, it uses the same kind of standardization of how to navigate around as like switches and other assistive tech. They all kind of use the accessibility tree, which I'll get to in a second.
Okay.
And so like just navigating around this way, I see a lot of people sometimes like, well, how do I get them to see this paragraph? This paragraph is really important for them to have context.
Right.
And I see them throw like a tab index on that. So they could tab to it. And that's wrong. That screen reader users know how to transverse and navigate through the screen. We don't have to make it interactive element. If anything, it'll really confuse them because the screen readers get a tab to it and they're going to be like, wait, can I action on this item?
Yeah. What is like, can you click on this paragraph? What does it
Yeah.
do? Exactly. Yeah.
It's funny how accessibility really is about fundamentals, semantics, and like just going down to like the root of what the web was and is.
Yeah.
And like having
Interesting.
proper hierarchy, having things like one H1 per page or H1s inside of sections, and like semantically laying these things out really helps because, like I said, the screen reader reads from a tree and it's a hierarchical tree.
Yeah.
So I mentioned the accessibility tree. And this was the second part of what really unlocked understanding accessibility for me. And you can like stop and ask questions anytime if it like kind of gets confusing.
No, I'm following so far, but I will definitely do that.
So like the accessibility tree is what the assistive tech reads from. It's just like this hierarchical tree of nodes, basically.
Right.
And
I mean, it's basically like the DOM sounds like.
Exactly. So the DOM, a lot of the times the accessibility tree just mirrors the DOM.
And I guess also I should say, we know what the DOM is, but why don't you tell people if they don't know what the DOM is, why don't you give them like a kind of synopsis of that? Yeah.
So the DOM it stands for the Document Object Model. And it just basically is like all of your notes, you have HTML, and that's a node in the DOM. And it's a tree that flows down from like HTML is the parent DOM element all the way down, and it kind of it's like tree of siblings and children and parents and that fun stuff. And you get to transverse that tree by like if you ever use jQuery, you're transversing the DOM. You're selecting things like if you're selecting a class that's like main, and then you select inside of that the first paragraph, you're transversing that tree,
right?
Which is neat.
Yeah.
So and honestly, like understanding the accessibility tree helped me understand the DOM a little bit too.
I can imagine.
So a lot of the times the DOM or the accessibility tree is an exact mirror of the DOM.
Okay.
And this is the part that really helped me understand accessibility and why when people who do accessibility say only use ARIA when you have to. ARIA is the our set of attributes that you can apply to elements.
It's like ARIA, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen that before. I've seen that like term before.
Yeah. So like those are elements that's in a web accessibility spec that basically allows you, if you need to do anything custom, which by the way, if you really the best thing to do is not to recreate native browser elements. Like don't recreate your own select. Right. It's really complicated. It seems pretty simple on the surface, but there's a ton of edge cases that you have to catch.
Especially like cross-browser, I can imagine.
Yep, and even something as simple as a checkbox to recreate. I wrote a blog post about how to recreate a checkbox accessibly. There's just things that you wouldn't think about, like clicking the label should set focus and toggle the checkbox. Yeah, and if you don't implement that yourself, then you have broken behavior.
You should send that to me, and I'll put it in the show notes for this episode. I'd be super interested to read that.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah.
So ARIA basically allows you to modify the accessibility tree to match what you think it should be, right? So if you need to implement this custom element, you can use roles and ARIA attributes to connect different elements together to recreate this native, or not native, but this custom interactive element that you need.
Right.
So instead of having this soup of 100 divs to the tree, you can modify the accessibility tree in the way the AT will relate. Sorry, that's my dog.
That's okay. I have a dog running around here as well. No problem.
The way you relate these elements together through like ARIA describe by or label by, you can connect these elements together. And when the assistive tech goes over that, it'll know what to do and how to piece those things together and make like a more cohesive, interactive experience.
Right. So I guess like when you start like or when you're looking at an existing project, do you find like, because I'm sure if you start a project from scratch with accessibility in mind, it'll like the process won't be as difficult as like retrofitting something existing already. So like, in your actual like day-to-day practice, do you find yourself having to like rig things up using the whole ARIA spec, or how does that usually look?
Yes. Basically
that's
a
unfortunate.
good amount. Yeah. So the recommendation really is just use native whenever you can.
Right.
It really does save you a lot of time, maintenance, overhead. This like once again goes back to like good code quality and whatnot. Every line of code that you write is a maintenance hazard.
Yeah.
So if you really, like, you have to weigh whether you want this really custom one-time password input field where it has 6 separate inputs, and how do you label that properly? And you can't auto tab.
Exactly what you're talking about. That's interesting. Yeah.
Like I'm kind of like fighting that right now at work. Is like
it really like for 2-factor stuff? You mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, is it really that much of a benefit to the user? Or what benefit to the user does that provide over just a single input field that is properly labeled?
That's
right?
Super interesting. Yeah,
that's really what. It's not gonna make their experience a lot better. And what if somebody that is blind has to enter this code and they're going back and forth from their phone because they got a text message and they enter a code wrong? It auto tabs those things. It's 6 different inputs. They can't review what they inputted because they would have to go through each input individually,
and they're timed right this whole time. Right,
basically, because like you hit the last key and it auto submits for you.
Okay,
which is a violation. You shouldn't make decisions for the user without them explicitly doing it. So like if you are like hitting auto submit on forms because you feel like they're filled out, or they satisfy some validation, that's bad because like the users have no way of going back and going over their information. Mm-hmm. So like if all of those things fail, like, are you really providing a better experience over just a single input?
Right.
And usually it's no. And on top of that, to try and make that accessible, you're going to add so many lines of code, so much complication. It's just a maintenance hazard, and I don't see it as a benefit over just a simple, like, it's a cute design, right? It looks nice.
Yeah.
But weigh the cost. And usually it doesn't work out.
Yeah, I had not thought about that. That's a very good particular example of a design that looks nice but doesn't really make a ton of sense usability wise. So when it sounds like that's like a specific example of something you're dealing with. So like, what does your day-to-day look like in terms of like, are you like using a screen reader like often day-to-day to actually like, I guess like audit how things are in the current state of your applications, or how does that shake out?
Yeah, so we ended up going through a third-party auditor to give us results and like all the list of violations and everything. And that was required by a tier 1 bank.
Sure.
And
I can imagine they probably have some stricter guidelines than some random startup.
Right, because like Section 508, you can get sued for these kind of things.
Yeah.
There's a legal requirement. So that's kind of why they care about it so much, right? Because the money's on the table.
Yeah.
But so we have the audit, and basically we went from there and put together a bunch of things that need to be fixed. And surprise, surprise, a lot of the things that this surfaced were just complicated user experience patterns, like a carousel.
Sure.
Or custom selects that were inaccessible.
Yeah.
Have like invalid roles and and whatnot, and checkboxes that didn't work because there's ARIA on native elements. So native elements are inherently accessible. You don't need to use any ARIA attributes or anything.
Okay. Yeah. I would hope so.
Yeah, right. And anytime you add ARIA, you run a risk of like complicating things or making things more buggy, especially when you add them to native elements.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just a lot of like going through, and it is like you fire up the screen reader, and for the best testing experience, you turn off the screen because you don't realize how much context you pull together by looking at other things.
Right.
If you turn off the screen and solely listen to just what the screen reader is telling you, you realize how much you're missing, and what might be confusing, or why you thought you were here in your mental model, but you're actually somewhere way different on the page.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll have to try that.
So
I can't even begin to imagine what that experience would be like. I really should try that. And I know like the iPhone has really good accessibility stuff, right? Or it's supposed to do the voiceover stuff. So I've kind of, I think one time I did it on there just out of curiosity, but I mean, like I'm so used to my way of doing things on the computer that I'm very curious, like what that would look like. Interesting.
And the first step, I guess, like if you want to achieve a good first step of accessibility is, and this should speak to a lot of developers and power users, if you can operate your app just through the keyboard, you are in a great place.
Right. That does. I like the sound of that because I am a keyboard heavy power user kind of guy. So,
right. Like, do you ever get frustrated if you can't like tab through a form and hit submit or something, and you're like, I have to actually use a mouse here? That most likely is an inaccessible form.
Yeah, interesting.
So while it's an inconvenience for you, it's probably a blocker for them.
Wow. Yeah.
So like just making sure that it's keyboard accessible to begin with is maybe a good foundation layer. But realistically, and Charles had this great quote. I'm probably going to butcher it, but basically, you can't have accessibility. You can't bolt it on after.
Right.
And his quote was something like, "People think you're bearing like the fruit of the tree is what you can't like bolt on accessibility afterwards. Like the DNA of the tree that produces the fruit." Is what you have to have from the beginning. It has
to be accessible friendly. Yeah. It doesn't just magically happen.
So like, exactly. You can't just like start off and like, you can't write your app and then afterwards and be like, okay, we're going to write tests. So like, you can't have, you can't add that to the DNA of your app. It has to kind of be there from the beginning. And the fruit that you bear will be accessible and tested. But it won't be, you can't do that after.
Right.
I did butcher it. He said it a lot more eloquently.
That's okay. I know I got what you're going for. And maybe if you, I don't know if it's like a tweet or something, we can throw it in later. That's okay. So we're kind of almost over on time here. I do want to ask real quick if you can think of any like, I guess of like canonical resources for people to kind of start to get familiar with accessibility, whether that's like blog posts or like documentation or something like that. I would love to point people in that direction if that kind of thing exists. Is there kind of a thing that comes to mind for that?
Yeah, there is.
I imagine there's like there's already a spec, but I don't know if that's like a fun or useful read.
There kind of is that problem in the accessibility world, right? Like you have people like in the JavaScript world, you have people like Wes Bos who takes really complicated JavaScript concepts like decorators and makes it really simple for people to learn and play with, and like people get it and get excited about it. We don't have those kind of resources in accessibility really. And like there's that kind of middle gap where it's either you have like really basic blog posts talking about something or you go read the spec. Like there's no middle ground usually. So like that's kind of missing. But Google and Rob Dodson, I think, he has a great course out there with Google that like goes through all the fundamentals of web accessibility. Nice. It's a really good one. There's another one out there called the Accessibility Style Guide, which basically shows you how to implement custom things with ARIA properly. You have the ARIA authoring practices.
I'm taking notes, so if you hear keyboard clattering, that's what it is.
No problem. The ARIA authoring practices is basically, it's still very specky, but it takes all of the roles and attributes that you can apply. Like if you need to implement a custom combo box, which is a select or a type ahead, they have examples for you to pull from. And they show you exactly how to implement those kind of things.
Yeah, I imagine.
Which is really helpful.
I imagine people are kind of implementing the same kind of things over and over again, right? So it's good that someone's taking the time to.
And honestly, like if I can get on my soapbox for a second, like I really hope in the future we have a standardized component library, so we can just do things like my select extends HTML select. So you don't like all of these problems arise from the fact that when the native thing that you have to work with, like a select, you can't have images inside the options. Right. So like when the native element doesn't work for you anymore and you go recreate your own, you have to recreate it 100% from the ground up.
Yeah. You don't get any of that. Like it extending I get what you're saying there, like extending something that's inherently accessible. Yeah.
That would be great if you could just like, all right, I need my select. Let's just get all these nice things. Right. And then we can just not have to rewrite focus management. What happens when you tab to it? What happens when you arrow keys, enter, spacebar, all these things you have to think about.
Yeah.
And then also like the last thing that I really hope becomes a real spec, it's called the accessibility object model. And it's currently being developed. It's in the Google, it's in Chrome. It's in Firefox, both of these behind feature flags. I believe Safari and the Apple WebKit team has just started implementing these things. It's called the accessibility object model, and what that does is it allows us to have direct interaction with the screen reader, and we can respond and hook into events directly from the screen reader. And it also allows us to stop using ARIA roles, and you can do these things. Because right now, how you make something accessible is you splatter a bunch of HTML attributes all over the place.
Yeah.
And this will allow you to do it programmatically by setting these things via JavaScript, and not by set attribute. It's just in like objects.
Right.
And this allows us to have like the native world is way better off in accessibility. You have direct interaction with the screen reader. You have objects that you pass around, and it's really nice. And this will allow us to have that same kind of interaction. Like in iOS, if you want to do UI tests, you have to pick from the accessibility elements. It doesn't allow you to do anything else.
Oh, interesting.
So you kind of have to make your app accessible to test it that way.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
That is really
cool. That will be awesome, because then, like, so for example, right now, how screen readers work is and with the browser is you will use like in VoiceOver, you'll have an action. So you use the VoiceOver keys plus spacebar to hit enter or to like action on that element. And what currently happens is the browser will take that and interprets it. Okay, I think you want to simulate a click here, and it will send a click event.
Right.
And that's what currently happens. So the browser's kind of doing this like interop in this weird middle layer, which can cause a lot of bugs, and it does.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So what this will do, and it has privacy concerns because a lot of people don't want you to know that they're using a screen reader.
Okay.
Which is also interesting. Yeah, it's a whole privacy debate. I agree with it. I understand both sides. As a developer, I would really love to have this like direct access.
Yeah.
Because I want to do good with it, but I also know other companies will not quite.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting.
And it's also interesting that this was all kind of sidestepped in the native world because they have APIs to hook into. If VoiceOver is on, if it's turned off, for how long it was on. If you want to, you can track all of those things. But in the web, we have this like privacy veil, right? So, like with this, since we're going to have direct access, and you'll know if somebody's using a screen reader because you're going to be responding to these screen reader events or assistive tech events. Like if you're on a slider and you say increment 5, right now it's like sends an event that is most like what you think it is, but in the accessibility object model, it'll be an actual screen reader increment event.
Oh yeah, that would be really cool.
But in order to have that, the user has to grant access to allow the browser to know that you're using a screen reader.
It's kind of like when it like requests like webcam or microphone access.
Exactly like that's going to be the exact same kind of pop-up.
Interesting.
So that's something that I'm very excited about, and it's on the horizon. And it'll unlock a lot of things that we can do and a lot of cool things with accessibility.
Yeah.
But right now it's not an official spec, and they're just kind of messing around with it. But we can link to the GitHub repo.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
And it's really neat.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and the privacy aspect of that is really interesting as well. Okay, well, I think I think we're probably good on time. I do want to give you a chance. I don't know if you want to do you want to plug anything? Can people find you on Twitter? What do you where are you at?
If anything, I'll just plug my Twitter. I'm at RobDel12 on Twitter. I tweet about random things, sometimes web development, sometimes not.
Same. I get you.
Yeah.
Cool. We'll put a link to that. Well, this has been really, really awesome. I kind of imagined going in that we had similar backgrounds, but I wasn't aware of how similar they were. So that was kind of fun.
We're the same person. No.
Yeah. Dun, dun, dun. So the other thing, I definitely got some homework.
What a twist.
Yeah. My homework is to turn my brightness down and use my screen reader that's built into my computer and see how that goes. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
I'll let you know how that goes. But we'll definitely have to have you back on sometime. We'll talk about some other stuff we didn't get to. But thank you. And it's been really, really cool. I've learned a lot.
No, thank you. I really appreciate having a platform to speak about these things. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks to Robert for coming on the show and talking a little bit about what he does. It was super interesting, and I definitely am going to at least go and try out this screen reader stuff that Robert was talking about. It sounds super interesting. So if you want to hear more from the Bytesized Podcast, you can subscribe on iTunes or whatever podcast application you're using. Just search Bytesized. It would be awesome if you tweeted about the podcast at Bytesized Pod. Sometime in the next couple episodes here, I will begin shouting out people that have mentioned the podcast on Twitter. That's a great way to get, I guess, some exposure for the podcast to people that wouldn't normally hear it. Also, if you could leave a review on iTunes, it actually does help with some stuff like discovering the podcast for people who are looking, for instance, for new technology podcasts. So it's not just a thing where I need to go make sure that my review count is really high or something like that. It actually does have a big effect on allowing people to find the podcast. So you can follow me on Twitter at I'mKMF. You can also follow Robert on Twitter, our guest for today. It's at RobDel12. Put that in the show notes. And thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time on the Bytesized Podcast. Thank you.